Hi Benno.
Hi.
You are going to show us a little bit of information about bulb.
I do have here tulips that are actually from the same bunch, but these tulips can be used for different purposes. First of all, these tulips, same as the others, they can be used for your yard. And if you use it for your yard, you typically plant those around October, November. Put it in well-drained soil and then let it develop. And then in the spring the tulip will bloom. Then next year in June, July, typically the following year in June, July, the plant will die down. And once it dies down, you just take all the leaves out, you dig up the bulb. But typically we'll have some baby bulbs, but you forget about those because they only produce leaves. The mother bulb will produce a new flower next year. So you store those mother bulbs, you store those in an environment, dry environment at around 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you can replant those again in the fall, and then you go through a cycle every year. So you can save those bulbs year after year after year if you do a good job. And you can also use these bulbs for bulb production. And that's what I did when I was growing up as a little kid. We grew tulips for bulb production. The bulb production is also then an environment that is going into the ground around October, November. Let those bulbs grow. In the spring they will bloom. Typically the ones that bloom, we snap off the top of the flower top. Then the plant will produce meat. They will produce meat for the new bulb, which is kind of interesting because inside this bulb, and that is already shown here, inside this bulb, a new little bulb and probably baby bulbs is already developing. So when it is harvested in July of last year, then the new bulb is not in there yet. It will produce a stadium, what they call G, in probably August. Then the new bulb, the flower, the leaves and everything, the plant will develop inside this bulb. Now when it is growing, then it will use the meat of this bulb, which then will produce the plant and new bulbs. Then by the end of the cycle, this meat is all gone. This is to reproduce a new cycle. So that is kind of interesting because then this bulb inside, the new bulb and the new tulip will grow slowly but surely outside this old bulb. And it will use all the food from this bulb for a new production. Now that is what I show here in the third option that you have is for flower production. So for flower production we imitate Mother Winter, because that's what it needs to produce flowers. Now we are going to do that, imitate it, in the coolers. We have coolers here on our farm, and you have shown it in videos, that will actually be used for, let's say, for cut flower production. So we plant those in trays in peat moss with a layer of sand on top of it, and then they will grow like this. They will grow the roots and the sprout for the flower. Now, the root system is always very important, no matter if it is for your yard or for bulb production or for cut flower. The roots are most important because this is the foundation for a good production. So you can see here the roots on this tulip itself already is, let's say, on its way for, let's say, for the flower production. Now, we can stop this process at a certain point. We start out typically at around 48 degrees, which is, let's say, good for, let's say, for a cooling period. These tulips need to have a certain cooling period in order to put them in the greenhouse. You have to have a certain amount of cooling, which is imitating Mother Winter. So then, if that is all done, then we can reduce the temperature from 48, 45, 42, all the way down to 32, all the way down even to freezing. So when it is time that they have enough sprouting and rooting, we can stop the process of growing. We just put it in a standstill. Then we can take them out at that stage at any time we want and put them in the greenhouse. Then when we put them in the greenhouse, it takes about 3 weeks from this stage to flowering. But the trick, of course, is to do it in such a period that sales that help recommend what numbers to use, which varieties to use, colors, and the amounts. That is what is important for the whole, let's say, period that is going to the greenhouse. So we like to have weekly shipments for flower production. That is determined by the sales team. They help me to buy those bulbs that are going to play a factor in, let's say, in the typical weeks that they like to have it in flowering. So then we have to trace it back to the beginning and say, okay, how many weeks does it take to get it in flower production? How many weeks do you have to have in the cooler? And that depends per variety. Believe it or not, every variety needs a different temperature control. So not by the end, when it is, let's say, to this stage. Then at a certain point, the whole cooling period has been done per variety, and then we can use it for, let's say, putting it in the greenhouse. So like I said, you can use it then for your yard, you can use it for bulb production, and you can use it for flower production. The only thing is for flower production, once we harvest the flowers, that will be the end, because then inside that new bulb, it is only, let's say, a little, let's say, new bulb developed. So if we harvest the flower, then it took all the let's say, all the meat out of this bulb for the flower production, but then we harvest the flower, and that will be the end for that bulb. So there is no reproduction from this bulb anymore. So I have to buy every year new bulbs for flower production. So actually this is
this is flower production in the greenhouse.
In the greenhouse.
So when you plant them out in the yard or the fields, then you have that second stage that you use, right? The second bulb that you were talking about?
The second bulb I talk about for bulb production,
okay,
that's going natural.
So that's when you plant them out in the field, that's considered the bulb production.
That is considered a bulb production, and that typically will reproduce new bulbs, a new mother bulb, and let's say baby bulbs. The mother bulb will then be used again for either for someone's yard, for reproduction, or for cut flowers.
Okay. What's the best sizing for cut flower production?
For cut flower production, we typically use any size between 10-11, sift, what they call sift, size 10-11, that's around the bulb, 11-12, or 12 plus.
Okay.
And most of the time 10-11s and 11-12s, because that uses less space in the coolers, less space with transportation, but they still produce a beautiful flower.
Okay.
Typically from a 10 and 11, believe it or not, and from an 11-12 you get a taller stem length than from a bigger size. Inside, that's why I cut it open, you will see the new flower. See that flower? And underneath is the stem, the leaves, and everything. So now it is slowly but surely growing outside this tulip bulb, and then it will produce a flower.
So when do you see that, the stem and the petals and all that, when do you see that developed in that bulb?
Probably if they are harvested in July typically.
That's when you'll start seeing that already? No. Okay.
When you harvest it in July, then typically there is nothing in this bulb that was, let's say, harvested.
Okay.
Then a new development starts inside that bulb, probably around August.
So they're sitting, you basically, when you harvest them, let's say from the field, you harvest them, then what's the process?
The process is to put it in a controlled environment, dry environment, in around 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's typically the right temperature. And then, let's say, within that bulb, which you harvested, within that bulb, a new development starts to take place. That starts typically, if you are going to use a magnifying glass, they have those, to determine when that new flower is developed. And that is typically about 1 to 2 months later.
After it's harvested.
After it is harvested. So for flower production, the ones that like to get the flower production in as early as possible, they look at that stage very closely, and once it is developed, then they can start the pre-cooling. but that is for every variety different. So if you would start a pre-cooling too early, you will not get any flowers.
Because that has to be developed in there already.
It has to have developed inside, but also it requires a certain temperature to get it to, let's say, to a development that is good enough to pre-cool.
Wow.
So that is what the flower producing, the tulip flower producing companies, they're looking at that with a magnifying glass, because they like to be the earliest on the market, and they need to know when the development is fully developed, not only the flower, the leaves and the stem, the whole, let's say, inside is there to start the pre-cooling. And that pre-cooling, like I say, that depends per variety. Some varieties take 18 weeks. Some varieties might only take 12 weeks. So if you are going to use a variety that requests 18 weeks and you do it in 12 weeks, not good. Right. That will result in failure. That is, let's say, important for flower production.
So this is why not too many people actually grow tulips, because it's pretty specific in how you do it.
Now, it is just like with any bulb growing, it requests, let's say, expertise and determination, and you have to know what to do. And that's why, to be honest, I like it when it is not that easy. You cannot step into this business without, let's say, really good expertise.
Right.
And that's what Holland America has over the years. We have, let's say, come to the conclusion when to do what, and that's why we get always really good flower production. We fine-tune the process. We have coolers that are perfect. I buy bulbs from the best growers. That is important, because that is really important, because every variety has different stocks, and it depends on the stock. So you might have a stock from one grower that is much better than the other grower. So that's why over the years I learned from whom to buy. So then those tulips will then go through the process, and if you do that in a perfect way, then you get the best flower production. What we developed with expertise, and that's why I feel comfortable. We have not only very, very good coolers, we have also very good greenhouses. Yeah. Our greenhouses are up to perfect. It's all controlled, the water, temperature, ventilation, everything.
That's awesome.
So that's why we are harvesting very nice quality tulips. And that is, of course, a comfortable feeling, because then we know that our final customer will be happy with it.
And we ship tulips, cut tulips nationwide.
Absolutely, to all 50 states. We are very proud of it. And we always get the best compliments, because our tulips are holding up, because that is another thing. The phase life of a tulip depends on how good you have done the process. So if you didn't, then the phase life might be only 4 or 5 days. While if you do it perfectly, and we ship it perfectly in a cooled environment, that's also important, because once we harvest the tulips, then it goes into coolers, and that has to be done perfectly. So we keep the temperature just absolutely perfect, not only in our warehouse, but also in a refrigerated truck, then from there to the customer in refrigerated trucks, and then at the final customer it goes into their display area, and then it will have a very, very strong phase life.
What's a good vase life from our product?
I would say at least 7 days.
Perfect.
Yeah. I grew up as a little boy on my father's farm, who only grew a couple of acres of tulips. Everything was done by hand, which still brings back memories. It was tough work, but it was in a way a lot of fun. And then from there we developed it into a bigger farm. And then, as you know, in 1980 we immigrated to the United States. We started here with a little bit of tulips, and that developed slowly but surely in more tulips. And because people like our product. And so tulips is definitely a very favorite flower for me. So tulips, daffodils, that are, and hyacinths are typically bulbs. And you can see the difference between a bulb and a corm and a tulip is that you can see there are layers in bulbs, like an onion. Tulips are like onions, while others like a corm is solid meat.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. If you look at anemones or you look at gladiolus or those kind of flower of bulbs, they have pretty much solid meat. While tulips have those
layers, onion layers,
like onions. That's how you can determine what is a bulb. Anyone asks, how can you determine a bulb? You say, okay, cut open whatever you produce, and if it has layers like a tulip, it is a bulb.
Interesting.
And otherwise it might be a tuber, or it might be a corm, or it might be a rootstock, which all produce flowers, and they are called many times bulbs, but technically they are not.
I learned so much today. And I've been in this business my whole life.
And that is what I learned through my career. I have harvested a lot of tulips in my life when I was a kid and growing up, and I always enjoyed it. I always loved tulip when the spring comes and they are coming in the field, they are getting in bloom, and you cannot even imagine in the Netherlands. We were growing tulips on a little farm. My father had 7 acres of bulbs. Only about 1/4 was tulips. And he was one of 2,300 bulb growers. When I grew up, there were 5,000 bulb growers in the Netherlands, which is unbelievable. So when it was springtime, you cannot even imagine those fields of flowers with hyacinths and crocus and daffodils and tulips, of course. People from all over the world came out to see them. I'm very thankful I grew up in this business.
And you also share the love of tulips in the spring with our local community.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that is correct, and I'm glad to do that. We have a little bit of a tulip field, not that much anymore, but we do because we do more in the greenhouses because that is more predictable, that is more dependable, but we still have a tulip Yupik field and a tulip show field. And people come from all over to see it, and we are very thankful that we do that because people like it a lot.
So our first weeks are now in the greenhouse. They are ready to grow for Valentine's Day, and yeah, we're pretty excited. It's happening. Tulips are once again planted, and they're getting ready in the greenhouse to start harvesting mid to end of January already.